My name is Madison Walker. I'm 17, and I've spent virtually my entire life wearing the modest insignia of the responsible daughter. Teachers scribbled it in red ink on her report cards, indicating a maturity beyond her years. When I came on stage as Juliet, as Viola, I was the one who learned everyone else's lines just in case. At home, I combed my younger sister Sophie's hair before kindergarten, organized the mail for Mom, reset the circuit breaker for Dad, and yet had flawless grades that gleamed on the fridge like little medals. Reliability feels safe until the world goes sideways at night. One chilly Thursday in early April, I went home from the local library carrying a stack of chemistry flashcards and a head full of Shakespearean monologues, rehearsing them under my breath as the streetlights turned on. The pedestrian signal glowed white. As I stepped off the curb, another driver, preoccupied by a buzzing phone and a late shift, accelerated when the light went yellow. Metal screamed, tires skidded, the sky flipped twice, and the stars rearranged themselves in a terrifying new pattern. I never heard any sirens. I subsequently discovered that the EMT who knelt by me continued saying, "Stay with me, sweetheart," as if that stubborn phrase could keep my heart from wandering. They rushed me to Cedar Ridge Medical Center, where buzzing monitors and the chilly hiss of ventilators replaced the library's murmured silence. While doctors threaded catheters through restricted veins and mended ripped skin with filament as fine as moonlight, time outside the operating room refused to pause. Sophie's 6th birthday was 2 weeks away, on April 17th. Mom, Catherine Walker, a corporate event planner turned stay-at-home perfectionist, and Dad, David Walker, a civil engineer who drew life in blueprints, had been building her birthday like one of his brothers. My parents chose to celebrate my sister's birthday while I was in ICU. I called my mother, and she said, "Don't just call me." But after 2 days, they were stunned when My name is Madison Walker. I'm 17, and I've spent virtually my entire life wearing the modest insignia of the responsible daughter. Teachers scribbled it in red ink on her report cards, trustworthy and mature above her years. When I stood on stage as Juliet, as Viola, I was always the one who knew everyone else's lines, just in case. At home, I combed my younger sister Sophie's hair before kindergarten, organized the mail for Mom, reset the circuit breaker for Dad, and yet had flawless grades that gleamed on the fridge like little medals. Reliability feels safe until the world goes sideways at night. One chilly Thursday in early April, I went home from the local library carrying a stack of chemistry flashcards and a head full of Shakespearean monologues, rehearsing them under my breath as the streetlights turned on. The pedestrian signal glowed white. I stepped off the curb. Another driver, preoccupied by a buzzing phone and a late shift, accelerated when the light turned yellow. Metal screamed, tires skidded, the sky flipped twice, and the stars rearranged themselves in a terrifying new pattern. I never heard any sirens. I subsequently discovered that the EMT who knelt by me continued saying, "Stay with me, sweetheart," as if that stubborn phrase could keep my heart from wandering. They rushed me to Cedar Ridge Medical Center, where buzzing monitors and the chilly hiss of ventilators replaced the library's murmured silence. While doctors threaded catheters through restricted veins and mended ripped skin with filament as fine as moonlight, time outside the operating room refused to pause. Sophie's 6th birthday was 2 weeks away, on April 17th. Catherine Walker, a professional event planner turned stay-at-home perfectionist, and her father, David Walker, a civil engineer who mapped out life in blueprints, had been building her birthday like one of his bridges. A pink marbled cake higher than Sophie, a rented clown who knew everything about balloon animals, a magician who promised rabbits and sparkles, and a massive surprise sphere that spilled prizes when it broke. Every aspect was timed to the second. I offered to assist inflate balloons, shape tissue paper flowers, and even write treasure hunt clues, but Mom shooed me away. "Matty, focus on your finals. You only get one graduation. Sophie has many of birthdays." I swallowed the subtle sting, folded another set of practice essays, and assured myself everything was great. Then the accident shattered every plan like confetti tossed too early. I spent the first 48 hours floating somewhere beneath anesthesia, where clocks dripped like candle wax. Faces blurred and sounds dissolved, but I could still feel people counting the minutes I couldn't see. When Sophie's birthday finally arrived, a Saturday perfumed with cut grass and promise, I lay motionless in intensive care. Nurses altered the dopamine infusions. I breathed through a tube. A window down the hall looked out over the hospital's conference pavilion, a glossy glass cube that Mom used to reserve for corporate product launches when she worked. That morning, she'd scheduled it again, this time for a 6-year-old who believed in dragons and sprinkles. I learnt the specifics later from mumbled snippets above my bed: how the clown juggled cupcakes, how the balloon arch framed a least magician who produced a live bunny and a rain of glitter, and how children screamed when the piñata exploded like a little explosion of sugar. I didn't need the details to identify the sound. Even though I was medicated, I could hear faint ricochets of laughter through vents, and the hazy bass of Happy Birthday floating past the scrub room. When I finally made it back to the surface 5 days after the collision, my chest was stapled and my limbs were heavy with medication, but my first reaction was remained the same: phone Mom and let her know I was awake. Trembling, I reached for the nightstand phone. My fingers were wrapped with tape, yet muscle memory recalls 10 digits like a lullaby. She responded on the third ring, her voice faint and distant, somewhat drowned out by party talk, helium balloons squeaking, paper plates clattering, and children cheering for another slice of cake. "Mom," I whispered. The tube had left my throat raw, and each phrase rasped like sand on metal. "It's Maddie," a pause in which someone places a hand over the receiver. Then her sentence, brittle and chipped at the edges. "Madison, don't call for anything right now," and the phone went dead. The dial tone pulsed against my ear, like a flat line. My family applauded a clown somewhere beyond the sterile walls, while blood still threaded through the 4 in my arm. Something inside me cracked, not bone this time, but trust, which was quieter and more difficult to reset. 2 days later, the ICU sent me to a normal room with pale curtains and a view of the parking garage. I practiced standing. Gravity felt heavier, as if the earth had moved closer while I was sleeping. I asked the charge nurse to contact my parents. She left 2 voicemail messages. No one arrived. So, I waited. I practiced breathing without the wobbly monitors. I imagined writing my undergraduate essay about the mathematics of forgiveness. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting each perforation until the pattern repeated and I was able to recite their constellation of stars. On the 7th morning, a volunteer wheeled an evasive daisy sent by my chemistry teacher, as well as a letter from the theatrical club pledging to leave a place open in the auditorium until you returned to stage. I pushed the letter against my chest. Paper provided more warmth than the solitude of home. That afternoon, I borrowed a nurse's cell. I called Dad first, which was safer terrain. He responded with cautious relief, which turned into guilt when he understood where I was calling from. He agreed to drive over right now, youngster. I urged him to bring Mom. He paused long enough for me to imagine the width of the home without me. They arrived together 1 hour later. Dad was the first to arrive, his shoulders bowed as if the breeze might take away his apologies. Mom trailed following, wearing a pastel frock with frosting streaks and clutching a unicorn-themed gift bag. Its tissue paper crinkled too loudly in the quiet of the hospital. I sat propped up on pillows, my oxygen cannula looping like pallid tendrils. My voice had grown stronger, not loud, but steady as steel. "You chose a party," I remarked. "You preferred her balloons over my buzzing monitors. I almost vanished, and you called it nothing." Mom's eyes flickered, first with wrath, then with humiliation, and last with something rawer that she tried to hide under her composure. "Sophie needed her birthday," she explained, her words as brittle as the sugar sculpture she had ordered. "And I needed my parents." The simple math of a family appeared unexpectedly complicated, with unsolvable variables revolving around a girl who wasn't dependable enough to survive on cue. Dad's voice crackled. "We assumed you were stable. They claimed you were asleep. You never asked," I murmured, watching the truth fall heavily on his shoulders. Silence pulled, heavy and sterile. A code blue hissed over speakers somewhere down the hall, bringing life and death back into conflict. In that echo, I inhaled the crisp, clear air of resolution. "I forgive you," I told them, and the room shook with the risk of saying it. Not because it is earned. Because I'm tired of carrying miles of pain in a body that has already been patched back together. Dad wept quietly. Mom opened the gift bag and took out a silver locket etched with an initial that did not match mine or Sophie's, possibly due to a mistake by the jeweler or Mom. She tried to push it into my palm. I folded her fingers around it instead. "Keep it," I said. "Remember the weight." They left quickly, leaving behind promises like loose receipts, daily visits, home-cooked dinners delivered to my bedside, and no more missed calls. I believed some of them, enough to allow the nurse to dim the lights without fear of the dark. A week later, on a bright sunny morning, discharge papers slid across a clipboard. The orderly wheeled me to the entryway, where magnolia flowers coated the walkway. The world smelled like soil and unresolved thunderstorms. Sophie waited on the steps, her sneakers still covered in confetti. She threw her favorite rag doll into my arms, a tattered plush astronaut with whom she had slept since she was a baby. Sophie announced seriously that she had reserved a seat for you. Now you can have it. I hugged her, aware of the stitches, and breathed the scent of crayons and cupcakes that lingered in her hair. She didn't comprehend how the fault lines ran beneath us, but she sensed vibrations and provided the finest antidote a 6-year-old knows: complete surrender of wealth. At home, Mom had set up the living room as a ceremonial location. On the coffee table was a new leather photo album. The first page had a statement in looping calligraphy: Madison Grace Walker, birthdays to come. The square beside it remained blank as morning. Whenever you're ready, Dad replied quietly. Healing is a spiral, circling back through nights when metal squeals and dreams in daylight that wear magnolia blossoms regardless. Physical therapy helped my legs to trust the pavement again. Theater rehearsals taught me how to raise my voice in octaves. Therapy sessions, both genuine and professional, trained my heart to recognize what it had previously dismissed as nothing. Summer arrived, laden with honeysuckle. One Saturday in July, I stood in the backyard, beneath strings of fairy lights, with a simple cake on the patio table. Friends packed the sliding door frame. The drama club performed harmony off-key and Sophie pirouette in a borrowed tutu. Mom clipped the shutter of a disposable camera, as if to capture proof of a second opportunity. When everyone finished singing Happy Birthday with more joy than tune, I closed my eyes, took a single breath, and wished that no one would ever dismiss my grief as insignificant again. Candle smoke curled into the evening, bearing the commitment. It's autumn as I write this, with rust-flecked and whispering leaves. College brochures are scattered on my desk. The future appears open and tender. The scratch on my collarbone has faded to a light crescent, but I can still feel it when thunderstorms echo sirens. Reliability formerly meant invisibility. Now it means defending myself with the same zeal that I used to defend others. It entails holding my family accountable without jeopardizing the grace I claim for them and for myself. It entails knowing that even those who love us can hurt us, and that forgiveness is a structure we construct to support weights we cannot endure indefinitely. I don't regret surviving. I don't regret forgiving. I only regret the instances when I felt like an afterthought. Scars, however, are stories that the body tells those who listen. So here I am, still 17 but older than the calendar can count, toes grasping the cool October dirt, palm curled around the astronaut doll perched on my dresser. I am repeatedly choosing to live, forgive, and captivate an audience with words that ring true even after the spotlight is turned off. If a balloon arches overhead or a choir of children's laughter flutters too close, I recall the chill of a hospital vent, the sound of a disconnected phone, and breathe through the echo. I focus my attention on the folks who stay, the ones who hold my hand when monitors beep irregularly, and I take a step forward into the script I'm writing for myself, a story in which dependability begins inside and spreads forth, bright as renegade confetti thrown into flight. A few weeks after my humble backyard birthday celebrations, I returned to Cedar Ridge, but this time as a volunteer, rather than a patient. Mrs. Delgado, the charge nurse with the peppermint-scented hand lotion, had taunted me about coming red to the littles in pediatrics if I was strong enough. I assumed she was being kind, but the idea grew. On my first day, I donned the navy smock that swallowed my frame and introduced myself to a line of wide-eyed children clinging to 4 poles covered with superhero stickers. I read them Charlotte's Web, giving each character a Broadway accent. The kids laughed, the nurses cheered, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a faint sense of belonging sprung up. After story hour, I pushed book carts past wards that still smelled of fear and antiseptic to me. I strolled by the trauma room, where surgeons had tried to keep my blood within my body. I mumbled a thank you to the closed door. In the burn unit, a boy named Caleb inquired as to why my limp was so minor. I knelt carefully because kneeling ached, and I informed him that muscles remember even when bones do not. He stroked the thin silver scar above my ankle with unsteady fingertips, saying, "Then I'll remind mine." School resumed in September. I walked down the hallway I used to glide down, feeling each bright flicker. Whispered interest followed me like static. She is the one that got hit. I pondered wearing a t-shirt that said, "Yes, it was scary. Yes, I still get nightmares. Yes, I'm doing really well overall." Instead, I raised my chin, addressed everyone by name, and reclaimed my spot on the bulletin board of honor roll photographs, not for the recognition, but because I refused to shrink. During theatrical rehearsals for the fall show, Mr. Klein chose Once Upon a Mattress, a comedy that requires slapstick agility. He designated me as Lady Larkin's understudy, gently reminding me that choreography may be changed. On stage, I discovered new body intelligence, such as micro-adjustments, pauses, and weight changes, which allowed me to dance without tearing stitches. When opening night arrived, I wore useless slippers beneath my gown and cherished the audience's laughs with the same fervor I formerly reserved for vital indicators. Home life shifted in unexpected increments. Mom apologized in many ways, including early morning smoothies to counteract the bitterness of my medication, surprise roses, and a knitted blanket in my college colors. However, she flinched any time my phone called when I was crossing the street visible from the kitchen window, as if sound alone spelled disaster. Dad scheduled a family counseling session during which we discussed disappointments such as architects creating earthquake codes, calculating stress loads, and introducing flexibility where structural integrity failed. Sophie, blind to human techniques, devised her own solution. Every Friday, she hosted Maddie Night in our shared bedroom. We'd make blanket forts and point spotlights at the ceiling as she interviewed me for her fictional newspaper. Questions ranged from if you had to eat only one cereal for the rest of your life to if you saw grandma's dog for a brief moment after death. I said honestly, Cinnamon Crunch and no, but I had a dream about stars that hummed. On Friday, I asked her if she remembered the hospital party. Her face creased into serious lines. I recall Mom's mascara running, she added, and Dad tearing his jacket sleeve while assisting the clown with balloons. I recall thinking that everything was too noisy. She delved into the fort's secret compartment and pulled out a single purple balloon deflated from a sandwich bag. "I saved it," she muttered. I clutched the limp latex relic between my finger and thumb, honoring the overlapping realities it represented: joy and neglect, innocence and remorse. College acceptance letters were delivered in perfectly neutral envelopes. Boston University's theater program astounded me. Stanford's engineering kit for women in STEM stunned Dad with a silent fist pump. A full scholarship to Northwestern's performance studies made me cry into a geometry notebook. On selection day, I chose Northwestern, a location far enough away to inspire new rhythms but close enough for weekend Amtrak rides home. Mom nodded, her lips stiff, possibly terrified of distances that aren't measured in kilometers. Before I departed, Dad asked to walk through the crosswalk where the accident occurred. We stood at opposite corners early one Sunday. Dawn painted the parking meters pink. Traffic murmured. I pressed the crossing button, and the white silhouette appeared. Dad was the first to enter the crossroads, holding out his hand as if it were a treaty. We traveled the faded stripes together. Halfway over, he pinched my fingers. We followed our new Morse code for "I'm here" until we reached the sidewalk. Orientation week at Evanston unfolded like a well-rehearsed overture, with name tags, college tours, and icebreakers discussing hidden abilities. Mine's surviving automobile hit a person at 35 miles per hour and remained silent. Instead, I stated that I could quote all of Hamlet, which is virtually true. My roommate, Yasmin, remarked that she could make croissants from scratch. She tacked a schedule of morning lakefront jogs to her corkboard. I posted a postcard of Cedar Ridge as a reminder that home is both anchor and undertow. The first semester blurred, with acting sessions where professors pushed us to dig up trauma for authenticity. I declined their shovels, late-night restaurants serving impossible pancakes, and cold winds that made even seasoned Chicagoans wince. I called home on Sundays. Mom's voice was lighter, although some nights she inquired if I glanced both ways, even inside buildings. Sophie sent sketches of aliens dancing with astronauts. Dad texted images of each bridge he inspected, with captions stating, "Structure stable." After a long improv session, I returned to my dorm and discovered an envelope under the door. Inside, a photo of me on stage, arms extended, spotlight dust particles drifting like snow. On the back, in Sophie's rounded handwriting, "You're holding us up like stars." I sunk to the carpet, tears unexpected and pure, and knew abruptly that survival had transformed me into someone's constellation. Life accelerated after returning to Northwestern. In the blink of an eye, freshmen transitioned into sophomores. I declared a double degree in performance studies and biomechanical engineering, strange twin endeavors that made academic counselors blink but felt like perfect symmetry, the art of bodies communicating the truth and the science of assisting them to move. Late at night, I glued sensors to exoskeleton prototypes, hoping that one day, accident survivors would be able to relearn to walk without the anguish that shadowed my own movements. Dr. Liu at the engineering lab expressed an interest and offered me grant money if I tested the setup on myself. I agreed, signing consent documents with hands that shook slightly. Strapping fiberglass braces around my legs evoked images of hospital immobilizers, but in the mirror I saw something else. Choice embroidered into every Velcro strap. Data points were multiplied for stride length, torque, and muscle activation. Numbers presented a narrative of resilience, measured in Newton meters per kilogram. Snow covered the campus during the winter of sophomore year. Crossing a slick junction, I hesitated, my pulse pounding with familiar sirens. My friend Yasmin noticed and put her arm through mine. "We look both ways jointly," she explained. The sentence became a routine, used before tests, auditions, and any leap of faith. We also printed it on matching bracelets, with tiny serif letters warmed by flesh. We gaze both ways together. Therapy sessions changed the focus away from trauma response and toward future orientation. Dr. Patel inquired, "What does thriving look like?" I brought in schematics of campus theaters refitted with accessible technology that I intended to build, designs of sensors inserted in costumes to collect movement data for physical therapy, and notes for a one-woman show called Nothing is Nothing. She grinned as she wrote in her notebook. Months later, she purchased front-row tickets. I spent my junior summer interning for a biomechanics startup in Seattle. On weekends, I helped at Harborview Medical Center by reading plays to long-term patients. One evening, a young woman with damaged vertebrae inquired whether I blamed the driver who hit me. I considered the skyline outside her window, steel and glass soaked in sunset, and responded, "I did, then I didn't, then I did again. Now I'm mostly wondering if he forgave himself." She closed her eyes, possibly adding, "Powered by TurboCribe.ai. Don't miss out on this opportunity."